Hello and welcome to Class Solutions Dental Education Podcast, the podcast series where we share knowledge and experience to provide value to you and your dental practice. I'm your host, Phil Cole, and I'm with my co-host, Chris Webb. And in today's episode, we'll be talking about practice valuations and finding the right, in quotations, what I say, broker to work with. Uh, and I say broker because later on in the podcast, we'll be able to give you our idea of what a broker is versus what we consider transition consultants. So we want to welcome everybody. And Chris, big topic right now because practice valuations, of course, tax season's over. The conversations start to ramp up about different things. But this is also time of season too, where people start to reflect on what their future is going to be, and how do they start making those decisions. And practice valuation is always one of those things that they got to think about. So, um, you know, why is practice valuation so important? I guess is really the first question, right?
Yeah, I think, I would agree with you. You get done writing your big check to the IRS and you say, "Man, do I really want to keep doing this? And am I ready to hand this off to somebody else?" So that first step in figuring out what your future plan is going to be a practice valuation. So can you just talk us through real quick, like, why is it important getting a practice valuation?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing with a practice valuation is no different than getting an assessment of your practice, right? When you're in your early to mid career, practice assessments are important because you want to know what potential you have in the practice, what's working, what could be, fixed and work even better, so that you can be as profitable as possible. And I think valuations are another one of those things where we seem to always run into the problem of getting people to call us and say, I'm ready to retire in the next year. What do I have to do? And at that stage of the game, valuations are almost too late, right? Because we know what we're running across right now all the time is we're getting doctors that are wanting to sell their practice, but they've waited too long. And so now to sell the practice, it's we're running into those areas of the practice isn't really sellable because it's not been set up properly. So for me, I guess the biggest thing is the reason why a practice valuation is so important is to know what the value is, so that you can start to plan sooner than wait until the last minute and find out bad results. That's one. And so that eliminates that problem. Now, the one of the ways that we've eliminated that, or well, I shouldn't say I think we've eliminated it, and why we have done that is we've created what's called a lifetime valuation. So you do the valuation with us, and then we'll update it for free for the rest of your life. And the reason why we did it is because of this problem, right? These guys wait until the last minute to do their valuation, and then when we get the valuation, like we just had one just a while ago, 15 straight years of in the hole practice. Now, granted, we can adjust things out and stuff like that, which we do, to show some profit, but it's still what people don't understand, or what dentists don't understand. In their mind, my accountant told me to do this, right? And my
Yeah.
accountant, and it's in my mind, it's all makes sense, and I'm making a good living. To the buyer, it's perception, right? The buyer immediately
Yeah.
sits there and goes, "This practice isn't making any money." So you've just made a person, a broker, or somebody like us, which we consider ourselves transition consultants, have to now explain. We have to give reason to it. And so it puts it in a bad light. The other thing that I would say is the importance of a practice valuation is when we do transitions, we always tell doctors there's three parts of a transition, right? And one of them is the financial piece. We have run across too many times where doctors say they're ready to retire, and they want to retire, they want to sell their practice. And then we always ask them, have you talked to a financial planner, right? We've had a financial
Hmm.
planner on our podcast, right? Um, we can't stress it enough. We've had multiple ones. Can't stress it enough because, and here's just the stats. The average, so 63% of dentists do not start saving for retirement until the age of 46 and a half. The national average is 60, I think it's 68%. I may be off a couple percentage, 67, whatever, but 68% until the age of 50. So, I mean, when you have that problem, then when you go to retire, I would say, when you agree, Chris, when we're doing these, probably at least 60% of the time, the dentists look at us and say, I have to sell my practice for this, right?
Yeah.
This price,
Yeah.
because I need to retire with this, right?
I'm
So
listen, I'm thrilled that you hit this point because this is one of the things when I started working with you that I loved about our conversations with doctors is, have you been working with a financial planner? Have you talked to your financial planner? And is your retirement dependent on the sale of this practice? Right? And you had alluded to it, and you know, I don't think he's controversial, but I know a lot of people don't like him. But Dave Ramsey, you know, he preaches about how investing earlier and the opportunity of that continued growth in grown interest on your investments. You know, so just the earlier you get started, the better. You can't make up for it with time, right?
absolutely.
You
I mean,
just you can't.
y- you
So
know,
you have to get started earlier, which then leads me to this, right? You hit this hard in when I started working with you, and then when I actually came on board with class, not just as like working with you as a partner, but coming on board with class, you hammered this point of like talking to them about working with their financial planner, talking about what they need to do for retirement. So that leads me to my next question on valuations, which is when is the right time to have a valuation? Like, do you have to wait until you're ready to sell? And I
well,
and I think you have a great answer for that.
I was just going to say that the third point that I was going to make, and since you asked it this way, is what's the right time? I would say at least 10 years out. But the reason, this is the other reason why we created a lifetime valuation, right? Because there's never a bad time now, right? Why would
Mhm.
you not get a valuation? Now, granted, if you just bought a practice, I wouldn't say that you got to evaluate your practice, the next year, right? I can't
Right.
say that it's going to hurt, but I mean, it's not really going to, if you know what the value of your practice is. But in 5 years, 10 years, I would say for sure in 10 years, if you took a practice that you bought for 800,000 and you're now doing 1.4 million with it, don't you think your financial planner wants to know that? Here's the other problem I have with it too, is it's the exact opposite of what I just said right there. I don't know how many times I've run into a situation, and I'll give you a prime example. This is real life story. Sat down with a dentist. We're going to sell the practice. We've gone through all the things with the buyer. We've done all of our system. We're very systematic, so we put everything together. We've gone through our APA worksheet. We've sat down. We've got everything ready to now sign the paperwork, right? So we schedule a time to go meet at a restaurant for dinner. We're going to have our last final thing, and then we're going to go back to the office, which was only a block away, to sign the paperwork. We're we're done with dinner, and we're going to move back. And all of a sudden, the seller says to me, "Okay, so there's one thing before we go back to the office. I gotta talk to you about." And I just look at him, and the buyer kind of gives me that glare, like, what is, because it was just that you could tell that was the
Oh
but
yeah.
moment, right? you know,
Yep.
he says, I feel I listened to you, probably a little too late though. And so I talked to my investment guy again, and he said I can't retire for 3 years. So I need buyer you to be an associate for 3 years, and then I'll sell you the practice. Well, of course, my mouth drops and hits the table. Buyer
Oh yeah.
walks. Buyer looks right at me, goes, "Deal's done. I'm out of here." And guess what?
Heck yeah.
When when hours and hours away, bought a practice for, I think it was 600,000. It's now doing 1.8 mil. I mean, so to him, it was by God's grace, this guy helped me out because I'm doing really good. But for the seller, and so of course he walks out of the restaurant and I'm there with the seller and say, okay, you talked to your investment guy or did you talk to a planner? I talked to the
Yeah.
investment guy. Okay, here's the biggest reason why I will say this, investment guys don't worry about your money after you retire. They're there in 9 times out of 10. So I don't want anybody that's an investment guy out there. I don't want them calling me saying that, hey, you lie. I don't do that. But 9 times out of 10, your investment companies, you say, I want to retire with 6 million. They will do everything that they can to get you at that 6 million. But the problem is with that is once you hit 6 million and they say, yes, you can retire, you don't know what the tax rules are. You don't know what capital gains is right now, blah, blah, blah. So you get 6 million, but let's say that what we were going to have there until the House, and this isn't to be a political thing, but when the House Republicans took over the House, what was one of the bills they killed right away? Capital gains being double taxed, right? So now, if for some reason we lose that again, if that was to be brought back again, and your investment guy who just got you the 6 million, but isn't looking at those kind of things, and you now want to sell your practice, when that bill happens and you're going to get double tax on your capital gains, or your capital gains is doubled, whatever. Sorry if I'm not, hence reason why I go to a financial planner to get the explanation, right? But whatever the case may be, do you understand where a financial planner is watching all of that stuff, is talking about, okay, you're going to need to take out this amount of money when you out of your 401k, but we're also going to take over here from this bucket. And so there's like 5 buckets, right, that you need to be aware of. And when is it ready to pull? When is it not ready to pull? Huge. It's just huge to make sure that you're set up right, right?
Yeah, they're not looking at amassing wealth. They're looking at disbursements, right?
Right.
And how do those disbursements work to avoid as much tax liability as possible?
So I had another broker from another company tell me that when I told them about this, they're like, that's very interesting. I've never thought of that. And I usually don't get into that, right? Hence where I go with the broker type thing. They don't talk about this because their job is just to sell a practice. So I guess let's just talk about right this second. We at Class Solutions, we're not a broker. We are a transition consultant. Okay, we are going to consult you from the A to Z of the practice sale and work with you through all of that. We're going to be working with team members like the CPAs and the financial planners, making sure that everything is set and that you have an absolute understanding of where you're going. So when I was talking to him about it, he said, that's interesting because I had a doctor that was with Raymond James, and they had it set up that he was going to get $150,000 every year, right? And it was like something like $10,000 or $12,000 a month, whatever the number is.
Yeah.
And whatever the case may be, no planning. And so this guy turned around and had a couple things happen with capital gains, tax laws, and different things like that. He burned through his first $150,000, within like 8 months or something. And he says, yeah, then I got this phone call, from him like, hey, I thought, this wasn't, he's like, hey, I sold your practice. That's all, I'm in for it and stuff. Now, granted, I'm not saying it's the broker's fault, but on the other hand, you know, get them to be more informed, right? So that they're making a good decision. Because the last thing I want to do is see somebody, our job to me as a transition consultant is to make sure that their legacy, that this family member, basically this practice is their family, that it's their baby, and their baby has been now taken care of and been processed over to somebody else that's going to care and love for it just as much as they did. And it's not one of these things where it just falls apart. So I think for that purpose. Now, the other purpose why for evaluation, I think is really, really vital. is because of disability. And I don't think people understand this, and hear me loud and clear. 1 out of every 2 dentists has to retire early because of disability or death. All right. You know, Chris, we have, in our last 6 transitions, 4 of them have been because of disability issues. So it's so rampant. And for the one that we have in that was in the Western Michigan area, I mean, you tell the story. I mean, sad.
Yeah, I mean, so with that, the way I look at it is the valuation, and we talked about like why is it important and when should it be done, and you had mentioned 5 or 10 years after buying it, at least 10 years before you're looking to sell, but it's a life insurance for your practice, right? Now, at least at one point, you had an idea of what your practice was worth. So your financial planner could look at it, you could look at it for the benefit of your family members, your dependents when you're gone and you can no longer practice.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, and the other thing with with the valuations, there's, once again, like, you get the practice valuated. Here's another prime example. Sat down with the valuation one time. There's too many doctors out there that hear the DSOs and what they're paying and how they pay and stuff, and they think that everybody's going to pay that, right? So the doctor was
mhm,
producing $1.2 million, and he thought his practice was worth $1.2 million. And he's telling he's got a financial planner, he's doing the right thing, but he's telling his financial planner it's worth $1.2 million.
yeah,
So now when he has $500,000 of write-offs, and because of being a PPO and stuff like that, the practice comes in and is only valued at, and I don't remember, but let's just say, 850,000. Guess what the first thing he says? Well, my financial planner is really upset with me because he's been planning for a $1.2 million sale this whole time. And you're telling me
yeah,
it's $300,000 less or 400,000, whatever. I mean, we'll justify in our valuation everything, right?
mhm,
But whatever the case may be, that's a big problem. No different than, once again, why it's not too soon is because the exact opposite. How many doctors, especially after COVID, have let their practices go, and so that doesn't hold the cash flow to be able to sell the practice. It can be a vibrant practice. That's fine. I mean, we run across it, but we have one, and in lower Michigan. And basically what's the problem with it is it's a great practice, fee for service, which is awesome. Nice building on a major traffic area in a metropolitan city. But what does it not do? It can't cash flow debt services. So what does
mhm,
he want? He wants, but he's in his mind, my practice is worth this, my building's worth this. And he's gone out and asked non-dental affiliated people. And of course, they just ramp up things. And so, what did he do when he sat down with us to go over the valuation? He said, "This is ridiculous. I'm not listing with you. That's fine. For us, it's like we're giving you the us. It's set there for a year now." And he's gone through how many
yeah,
brokers? No one can sell it because
yeah,
you can't sell something that a bank can't finance. It's just that simple. But yet,
yeah,
if he didn't wait, when he came to us, he came to us and said, "I want to retire right now." And I was told that since where I'm at, I should be able to sell this within 3 months.
yeah,
Okay, can't sell it in 3 months. So what's our deadline and stuff? Maybe a year, depending on what your practice looks like. But he was, for him, sitting down with him, the practice is great. And because he was fee for service, he thought everything was great. The problem is his P&Ls and the way his accounting was done was so messed up that once again, it didn't cash flow. Um, and we've had several of those, right? So,
yeah,
I mean, when that happens, you don't, and you want to sell in a year's time, you don't give us enough time. We got to clean all that up. So, hence, get your valuation minimum 5 years. If you know you're going to want to sell in 2 or 3 years, get the valuation right now. If you want to sell in 5 years, get it right now. But I would really prefer you to get a valuation done 10, 15 years out, because there's a lot of other things that we can do. And then we can monitor that as well too, so that if you have all of a sudden a practice is doing $1 million and the next year you dip to 800,000. Why? I've been coming to work and I'm just sore. I'm tired. So I decided to, instead of working 4 days, I went down to 3.5 days. Okay. That's a big difference, right? $200,000. So once again, can we fit that into the parameters of what you're looking for in 5 years of a practice sale or 10 years of a practice sale? Is there other things that we can do? If you're getting that tired and you don't want to retire for 10 years, you actually think you're going to make it another 9 years if you're already, feeling it? So do
Yeah.
we have to bring in, do we have to start looking at other avenues, an associate, different things like that? Those are all things that give us the ability to really give you good, sound advice. Whether you take it or not, that's up to you. But at least have your options for
Yeah.
that.
So let's backtrack real quick. I'll give two examples of things that we've run into. So one is a doctor who is young, like really young, not hasn't even hit 50 yet. All of a sudden developed a neurological disorder, can't practice dentistry.
Yep.
So again, you're talking about, doing a practice valuation early. Who in their right mind in their 40s would say, yeah, I want to get my practice valued. I want to know what my practice valuation is. Well, here's where we talk about with that insurance, right? So now all of a sudden it's, hey, I need to do the practice valuation, I need to sell my practice because I can no longer practice dentistry, right? So you got to get all the information together, you got to put together the practice valuation, then you've got to start to market the practice and try to bring in a buyer. I mean, it takes time, right? It's not a quick turnaround thing. There's time involved in it. So now we're losing time while he can't practice to try to get the information together, to put the valuation together, and then find a buyer to sell the practice. So we were able to do that, right? But just think of the amount of stress and anxiety that could have been taken off of his shoulders had he had the valuation done already and kind of had an idea of what to expect, so that we could jump right in and move forward with it. We're the real quick tweak and update to the valuation, get it listed. Now you're talking days instead of weeks or months. So on the positive thing, we did evaluation for a doctor early. He wanted to do it ahead of time, so we did it. A year and a half later, he has a massive heart attack and is like laid up in the hospital. His wife calls and she says, "Chris, I don't know what to do. Like, my husband had a heart attack. He can't continue to practice dentistry. What do I do? Do I need to sell the practice? Like, what do we need to figure out?" Well, we had the valuation, so we were able to get together on it and talk about it and say, okay, we can get some updated numbers, we can update the valuation, we can sell it. So we had everything ready to go, and luckily, the surgeons at the hospital were able to help and get him on the road to recovery. He started to get better, started to feel better, and decided he wanted to go back to work. So instead of selling the practice, we found an associate. But again, we had all that information ready to go so that we could start marketing the practice and we could market for an associate. So that life insurance for the practice helped give them peace of mind. And instead of being even more stressed about a really stressful, scary situation, they were able to come to me and I was able to take that stress on and run that part for them. They could just focus on his health. So
Yeah.
so that's the kind of situation, and you're coming in clear now. So do you want to jump back to what we were talking about?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I mean, I think the thing is when you're doing those valuations, what we always stress upon is like it's an emotional thing, right? I mean, when you start to
Hmm.
fill out our questionnaire and start to get all the reports and we start asking you all kinds of questions, that becomes a very emotional time. You're like overwhelmed. So just think about being disabled now or having another problem where you're like I had one of my gentleman too, where one day he shows up to work and he's working fine. The next day he shows up, he can't hold a handpiece, and he can't. His hand's gone numb in one
Oh,
day. In
yeah.
one day. So now think of that emotional, like you're already stressed. Like, why can't I hold this handpiece? And now I got to come to you and sit there and say, hey, by the way, fill all this stuff out. And we need this, this, and this to be able to do this valuation, blah, blah. that in itself is not a, piece of cake moment. There's a little bit of stress added to that. But
Hmm.
then to turn around and have that with the doctors nailing you, and we got to run this test and this test. I mean, it's just, you can't overemphasize the importance of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I mean, that hits like you had talked about earlier. Financial is just one of those pieces of a transition. The other one is the emotional piece. Really, we're emotional beings. Even if you don't think you are, you make decisions based on emotions. And so when you're getting into something, you're talking about the end of your career, the end of your practice that you've been working so hard on, what you went to school for, what you dreamed about for years, it's going to get emotional. So you're right. If you can get that done ahead of time, before that time comes where reality sinks in and it is time for you to transition out of dentistry and to hand your practice off to someone else, that's going to be emotional enough. Why not do it ahead of time so that part's done?
Absolutely
Um,
agree.
yeah. So again, I want to reiterate that's one of the things I love about what you've established in our company and why we do the things we do when we do them. Um, One more thing that we had kind of touched on, but you get the valuation done. You know why it's important now, right? So you kind of know where you're going and where you're headed. You can track your practice. You can work with your financial planner on it. It's important. It's life insurance for your practice. Get it early. So we kind of covered those things, but now you have your practice valuation and it's time to sell your practice, right? There's so many different transition companies out there, and again, just for uniformity of language, there's many practice brokers, right? So let's talk through what are some of the questions that you should be asking a practice broker before you sign with them, because there are a lot of things I don't think people pay attention to or doctors pay attention to. They want to list the practice and they say, hey, yeah, I know this group, I recognize this name. So what are the things you should know before you're willing to sign a listing agreement with a practice broker?
Well, for me, it's always going to be the commission structure, right? I mean, what do you charge for selling the practice is always going to be the big one. But I think the other one that's something that really should be considered or that you should be asking for is like, what's your involvement, right? I
Hmm.
mean, there's a lot of companies out there that when they get the listing, they advertise it, and when the buyer comes in, or if they already have a buyer, then all they do is put the two seller and the buyer together with lawyers and CPAs and let the lawyers do their work, right? Um, so for us, I think that to me is I've I've seen all those scenarios and never do they really work out. When you talk to the dentists that have had a terrible transition, what do they always say? It's those kind of scenarios, right? There was no involvement. So I think there's a couple things. One, with our valuation, we make them non-negotiable because we believe in, our motto is fair, transparent transitions. So I think that's first. We're gonna make the valuation fair. And if you're trying to be, if you don't believe in a win-win situation, and if you don't believe in making that transition be simple and just simple, but I didn't lose. I didn't necessarily get one over top of the other guy, but we both win on this one because it was fair, and I feel very comfortable at who's taking over my practice, which is the most important. And so with that being said, I think that's another question is like, what are you trying to establish with the buyer? Because when we have I mean, we have all kinds of buyers in a database, right? And every broker does. It's a seller's market right now. Buyers are all over the place.
Hmm.
But every just because if we're selling a practice in, West Palm Beach, Florida, right? And we have 15 buyers, it doesn't mean that we're going to bring all 15 buyers to that seller. And the
Right.
reason being is because out of those 15, 10 of them might not even have the same philosophy. They don't want to do the same dentistry. They just aren't a fit. So that's, I think the big thing is when you're trying to figure out who to list with is like, what do they do for you? The other thing for us is, like I said, when I said in the very beginning, from A to Z, I mean, we're helping with the due diligence. We're helping
Mhm.
with, that we have created systems. That's just all I can say is we've created systems so that everything needs to be followed. You don't need to go to your lawyer and ask them, what should I do here? What should I do there? You don't need to go to your CPA to say, should I do here? Because once again, I just got off the phone yesterday with a gentleman, and he says, well, I got to go to my lawyer for this. Okay, has your lawyer ever done a dental transition before? And he says, no.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so why would you go to him? That's all I'm asking. You don't have to go to me. Once again, I want somebody that wants to work with Class Solutions, right? I don't want you to feel you have to. I want you to want to work with us. But I guess that's my question, right? Is why would you go to somebody that's never done a dental transition and has never isn't even affiliated with dental? I mean, you and I had a practice where I had the seller, you had the buyer, and then the buyer said we said, let's just use these lawyers, they're dental specific, and she brings in a friend that's a bankruptcy lawyer. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
not a good scenario, right? So you got to there's no help on that. So I guess what are they going to do with that? I mean, how involved are they going to be? And I think that the other one is basically, are they going to be an advocate, or are they going to help the buyer, making sure and being careful of knowing that everything is in good standing with everything that needs to be done? Because the other thing that we fall into, and I know some people will call it unilateral versus bilateral representation, you got to make sure though that whether we're both, right? If the doctor seller says I only want you representing me, that's fine. But I want to explain to him that, listen, if the buyer has a representation and their representation is once again a CPA, that's Aunt Holly, and she doesn't do dentists, is she going to be, how long do you want this thing to drag out? Because we can close the thing in 30, 40 days if we need to with our due diligence, but we're going to give the buyer a checklist. We're going to make sure that they're funded, I mean, and stuff. Because once again, if buyers don't know, they don't know what they don't know, right? So another
Yeah.
example that just is happening right now, we go to the buyer, says, yes, I'm going to be using PNC, I'm all set. We go ahead and do everything. Come to find out, you know what? When he said all set, his idea is he's all set. He's going with PNC. When we hear all set, you're pre-approved, and he says yes, we think you're pre-approved, right?
Yeah.
No.
You've started all that process. Yeah.
Yeah, you haven't gone to the bank yet, and you didn't know that you had to go to the bank. So those are the kind of things that I say is where I feel brokers are expecting them to know all that. We know this is all going to happen, and we all know it's going to, and so we take over. The last thing that I would say that you should ask is, before you get involved with anybody, is, will you co-broker? So in the
Mm-hmm.
real estate world, we know that buyer seller represent, so they get 3%, the other one gets 3%. In the transition world, co-brokering is just a bad thing. I don't know why. Because to me, if we're going to actually represent our sellers or our buyers, then we should be willing to, do whatever we can to get it. So we will co-broker. Out of the nation, I think we've maybe found 4 brokers that will co-broker with us in my career and in everywhere in the United States. It's just a bad omen, and I don't get it. But here's once again the problem is everybody, for some reason, brokers feel that they don't want to. What we hear all the time is, I don't want to share my commission, because there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of buyers right now, right? So they feel as though they'll find somebody because there's enough buyers. The problem with that is it's been like that for the last 15 years or so. So, but there's eventually going to be a switch. It's no different than, the bull market versus, it's the market will change. And when it becomes a buyer's market and there's all kinds of sellers out there and we don't have any buyers, I would love to see what's going to happen with brokers then. Will all of a sudden co-brokering come back or not? I don't know, but you definitely should ask.
Yeah. Let me hit that from the real estate side. So coming from the real estate world, the bilateral unilateral conversation, when we run a transition, most of the time we'll run it as a transaction broker, meaning that we are serving the practice, the deal, and not one doctor or the other. So we don't have a fiduciary to one side or the other. Our goal is to keep it simple, fair, and transparent, the things that we talk about all the time. So that's why we have our non-negotiable valuation, right? We do the same thing with the real estate. We're going to help figure this thing out so that it works for both sides. And again, win-win. You don't have to take advantage of somebody else to be, to be victorious in a transition, right? So we run it as a transaction broker. So we are going to be more bilateral, in the way that we're servicing the practice, right? Um, and then second of all, when it comes to co-brokering, you hit the nail on the head. When you talk about residential real estate, which everybody is a little bit more affluent with, right? A little bit more engaged in. So you hire somebody to list your house, they're going to negotiate a commission with you, right? A lot of the times you're going to see, 6%, 3 and 3. But again, we're not trying to stimulate or stipulate what those commissions are. It could be whatever agreement you have, right? But you agree to a commission to pay your listing broker. Okay. They list your house and market it. If a buyer comes along without an agent and buys your house, you still pay that same commission to that listing broker, right? But if that buyer comes along and they have an agent, your expectation is that that agent is going to split the commission with the buyer's agent, and they're going to work together to get your deal done. All the paperwork, all the legal stuff, the title, all that stuff, right? So they're working together and they're going to split that commission. But you're right, it's really odd in the transition world when you sign with a listing broker. It's not an expectation that if a buyer comes along and has a representative, that they're going to split that commission. And most brokers won't do that. So they'll say, "Oh no, nope." In the either one, they won't show it to your buyer because that buyer's working with you, or two, they'll say, "Hey, if you want to get paid, then your buyer is going to have to pay you." Does the seller know that? If the seller knows and is okay with that, then that's fine. But does the seller know that you've now just limited your pool of available buyers? And does the seller know that you're not willing to split your commission with somebody to try to get a deal done for them, even if it's the right doctor, the right fit, the right situation? So just, if you don't care, then that's fine. But man, you should at least be informed, because otherwise you're going in with the understanding that your broker is doing their fiduciary for you, their best for you to find somebody, and they may not be. So you should know, are they willing to co-broker?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what you're going to find is I mean, those who are listening, you're not going to find too many. And they're going to have their reasons, right? They're going to have their reasons. But as far as I'm concerned is, once again, to be able to do what's best for both buyer and seller. And once again, it's the transaction, right? It's the transition of the practice. And if we're doing what we say we're going to do, and do it the ethical, moral way, then and we're the transparency is the most important part, you know. And if we can eliminate some of these other things that we put in place, then the transitions should be very simple and with no problems whatsoever. So I don't know what the stats. I don't know if this stat is true or something, but I've heard or I've seen where practice brokers have a 65% close rate. I mean, I I'm at we're at 98%. We've had the one that I mentioned in this podcast, where we were at the dinner table and we were supposed to go back. That's the one that failed. But I don't think that from that point on, I learned from that, right? It was one of those things where I made the mistake of saying, well, he's made his choice. And instead of forcing him to have the conversation and make sure you're okay, instead, well, if he doesn't want to talk to him, made the choice. Chris, and you've worked with me enough, I pound it. into the seller's head to talk to their financial planner and get an answer first. A lot of times we like to talk to them ourselves so that we can make sure that they're getting the right information as well. But I think that's it. I mean, those are probably the major things that you should be concerned about. Anything after that, you're probably getting a little ticky-tacky on some things. But I just think that the big thing is, ask them, what are they going to do for you? And if it's just going to be that they're going to post it on the local, dental town, and they're going to put it on the local state, convention or association website, I mean, it is what it is. I mean,
Yeah.
you're going to get what you'll get it sold probably eventually, but who knows what's going to happen. I would say the other thing is maybe this would be another one too. Ask the brokers who they use for their professional team. What are their recommendations? Are they using guys that are, in a good old boys club, or are they actually using some really sound dental specific team members, right? Or is there, I've always used this is my buddy, and I always use them. We go golfing all the time and blah, 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 blah. And he really is not. I mean, make sure that they're working with some reputable people, I would say, or dental specific people. So,
I love it. I just think to kind of put my own summary on it is you spent 8+ years going to school to learn your craft, and you've got how many continuing ed hours into building your professionalism up. This is one of your last things that you're going to do in that profession, in that career. You're probably only going to do it once, right? You're going to buy and then you're going to sell, or you're going to start up and you're going to sell. Just make an educated decision. Know what you're getting into, know where you're going, and don't just do it based on somebody else's recommendation. Understand what you're doing.
yeah, no, I agree 100%. So, well, I think that we've given quite a bit of information. I want to once again thanks Chris for going back and forth with me on this. We could go for a couple more hours. I know that for a fact. But if anybody has any questions, please reach out to Chris or I. You can go to our website at www.classsolutions.com, and you can find us in the Meet the Team. Reach out to us. We're always willing to have conversation. Hopefully this podcast kind of shows you that, and that we just want to make sure that you guys are getting good information. As you know, Class Solutions, we always our goal is to educate and is try to get you as much information so that you can make good decisions. And so we don't expect that just to be on this podcast. If you have some specific questions or would like to talk to us, reach out to Chris or I, or if you're or anybody that's in your area. So any of our transition guys that are in your area, reach out to them. So if you enjoyed our show, please rate us, review us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast information. So once again, I'm Phil Cole, and with my co-host, Chris Webb, we want to thank you for listening to today's episode.